Let's talk about doing some elemental combos to create some effects. Alright, so you may have noticed that I moved my two areas here, which are just represented by these two cubes that I'm just showing via debug to show the collision area. Right, because that's all I'm using for this as an example, is an area with a shape. And these can easily be applied to a projectile or be attached to a particle emitter if you want to do like maybe a shot of flames. Or again, you could use a projectile if you want to do like a fireball, whatever it is that you want to do. Doesn't really matter, these principles remain the same. That's why I'm just using two areas to demonstrate. So with one, the way I have mine set up is I have them, my areas have an export here where I can select different types. Now the question that was proposed here for this video was related to Genshin Impact, with the main objective being elemental synchronization, as they put it. Basically mix two elements together to create a new effect. So in this case, I have one element here set as cryo, and my other area is set as hydro. Now, I don't play Genshin, I played Wuthering Waves rather, but from what I can see on this Genshin page that I was taking a look at, hydro and cryo should create a freezing effect when used together. So I move hydro in, and then I take cryo. Let's say they get hit with cryo next together. And you see this ice cube kind of fused up, and of course from there you can decide if you want to slow that enemies down, right? Reduce their speed, or completely freeze them and stop them from moving, whatever it is you want to do. But I just add this little visual effect just to show you that things are happening, things are mixing. So likewise, if I switch this to using pyro and change my other one to dendro, which from what I understand is basically just fire and wind, we go ahead and affect it with one and affect it with the other ability as well. And now we got flames happening, right? We got this burning effect going on. All right, now how do we go about doing this? Well, my enemy here, he's just a character body, of course. He's got a mesh, he has a collision, very basic setup, and then he's got an element status node here, which this is actually part of a custom class. So I'll go ahead and stop this preview so we can get that out of the way. And you can see here, so we have this elemental status, which is its own class. And that's going to be where the meat of our stuff is going to come into play. Now I also have my burning effect here, which is just a GPU particle that you saw that I'll be spawning in when we dive into the code. You can take a look. And this is my ice block. It's just a cube, and it's got a material on it. That's a transparent kind of bluish color. Right, now my areas that are actually going to cause this reaction, right? Apply these elementals to them. They're just an area 3D with a collision shape. So again, you can just take this and you can throw it on your projectiles, or attach it to, or give it a particle emitter, whatever it is that you want it to do. And they've got a signal. Their signal, simply put, is just on body entered. So we're basically checking, right, body entered, which is probably going to be our enemy, right? Because that's who you're going to be shooting or casting flames or whatever it is that you're doing. And on this script, we just have one export variable. I just called an E type for elemental type, and that is for my elemental status class, and the element property, which is an enum, and that's what's getting me my drop down here for none, pyro, hydro, cryo, dendro, and electro. So I can easily just select from this drop down the type that I want to use here. Now on body entered, of course, that's going to have a body in there. It's a node 3D in this case, because we are working with 3D for this as the example. And I'm just checking if the body has an elemental status node, then I'm going to get the elemental status node. I'm going to call the apply element function on it, and I'm going to pass in the type, that I'm applying, and a duration. All right, now in this case, I'm just using 5 seconds for all of these, which you can easily change this based on the type if you wanted. That's no problem. And now for the actual elemental status, where all the meat and potatoes are. All right, I'm going to scroll all the way up. I'm going to go into distraction-free mode so we can get as much space as we can to take a look at this. Now, as you see at the top, I've made this a class, so class name elemental status, and it's just extending a basic node because it doesn't really need to do anything. It doesn't need a position. It's just holding basically information and applying effects and things like that for us. All right, and here's our enum of element that I mentioned previously. All right, inside of our area here, right? Elemental status and then the element property, which I said was an enum. That's where this is coming from. Elemental status class, the enum property element. All right, just want to make sure nobody's confused with that. And now I'm going to come down and I have a couple variables here. I have an ice block for my constant, and that's just holding my ice block scene, so I can easily instance that in and have my variable ice inst so that I can create my instance from it. All right, because this is my ice block constant here. It's just going to be a packed scene, and have the same thing set up for my burning effect. Only, of course, my burn inst for my instance is a GPU particles. I have a signal here. I'm not using this signal. I am emitting it, but you could go ahead and use this if you wanted to. If you wanted to have maybe something else react with this, if you wanted, the signal's there. If you don't want the signal, you don't have to use it. Like I said, I'm not using it. I'm just emitting it. But if you wanted to connect it with something, you could. All right, we have a couple more variables here. I have an active element, which is also an element type from our enum, and it's by default set to element none. I have my effect duration, which as a default we're setting as 0. And then I have an effect timer. Now you could go ahead and add this as a child into its scene if you wanted to. But since I'm just using this just straight as a class, I'm just going to add it in. No problem. I'm just going to create this timer inside my ready, which you can see here right at the beginning. We're creating a timer to handle our effect duration. So I create a timer, one shot is off, right? Set to false. Auto start is also on false. And then add child, so I just add it into my scene as a child of my elemental status. And then I connect the timeout signal with effect timer.timeout.connect and pass in the name of the function or the callable if you want to get technical. All right, so what are we going to have in here? So we're going to have get reaction. So we're going to create our function called get reaction. We're going to have 2 arguments, element A, which is an element, and element B, which is also an element. And that is going to return to us a string. And to make sure that these can go in either way, for example, we can do hydro first and then cryo, or we can do cryo first and then hydro. In order to get freeze either way, we're just having this if statement, and we will use these parentheses here. So we're saying if element A is hydro and element B is cryo, or element A is cryo and element B is hydro. Right? So we're basically flipping that around. So we say if hydro is first, cryo is second, or if cryo is first and hydro is second, then we're going to get a return of freeze for the reaction. And then we do the same thing with an else if here. And we're just checking with exact same thing about pyro and dendro, or dendro and pyro. And then we return burn. And again, you can just go ahead, you can just come in, you say elif, and in fact, you don't even really need to do that. So you can just copy the elif that we have here, paste it in, and then just come in here, right? So you can say if element dot electro and dendro, or dendro and electro, and then return whatever this effect is, right? So you can easily just add in, just slot in a new effect with very little effort. And if we don't have any matching reaction types, we just get an empty string returned to us, which lets us know there's no reactions. All right, now here's apply element. Now, if you remember that, Just jump back here. This is where the function that we're calling here, where we're passing an element and a duration. Right? Whenever an enemy comes in contact with our projectile or just area in general. So this is the function that we're calling here. So it has a new element of type element, and it has a duration. Of course, it's a float. And we're going to check if active element equals element.none. So if we do not have any elements affecting this enemy at the current time, then active element will be set to the new element. And then we're going to set the effect duration equal to the duration we passed in. And we're going to create an effect timer. Or sorry, we're not going to create it. We already have it. Effect timer. We're going to start it with a control of 0.1. So every 0.1 seconds, we're going to basically subtract from our duration. And then I'm just printing out, in this case, active element. So if we take a look down here in the console, we can see active element dendro in this last case here. And if you've never printed an enum, you can just do the enum, which in my case is element, find key, and active element in this case, right? Because that's just going to give us a number, and that's going to get us our value there. All right, so else. So if we already have an element affected us on this enemy, then we're going to create a variable called reaction, and that's going to be equal to our function get reaction. Remember, that's the one that we have up here that we went over, where we're checking if element A and B is creating a reaction that we can return to us. Otherwise, we get an empty string. Right? So once we find out if we have a reaction there, then we're going to check if reaction not equals to an empty string, which means we do have a reaction of some type. Then I'm going to call my function trigger reaction and pass that reaction in. And then I'll set the active element to none. Else, if we do have no reaction, which means we got an empty string returned to us, then I'm just printing out no reaction. And I'm setting the active element to our new element, and then I set the duration. And start our timer. So as an example here, just to show you that, so I'm going to go in here and we're going to change this to hydro. So we now have hydro and dendro. And if I were to mix those here, you see dendro active, and I move pyro in, and you can see we got printed out to our console, no reaction, because those two abilities or those two elements do not mix. All right, so that took us into our else, because we checked and we had no match in our if statements here. So we got our empty string. Because we got our empty string, we went into our else block here and printed out no reaction, and we just set our element and started that timer. All right, so now trigger reaction. This is where, if I scroll up, we can take a look. Remember, if we had a reaction of some sort, so if we got freeze or burn, in this case, returned back to us, we're calling trigger reaction and passing in that reaction type. All right. So that reaction is a string, and I am printing out triggered reaction and putting in the type. So this is where we're getting triggered reaction freeze, triggered reaction burn that you saw earlier. And here's where I'm emitting my signal, reaction triggered, and passing in that reaction type in. So if you do want to connect this signal to something, you're going to get that reaction type sent along with the signal. Again, you don't have to use that. You don't need the signal at all, but if you do want to use it, you can do it here. For example, you can take this and connect it to connect this signal to your enemy that's holding an element class or an element status here, and then maybe if they hit with freeze as a reaction to that, that's when you can freeze or slow the enemy, right, based off of the signal here and the type that gets passed in. Or if it's burning, you could send this signal, receive it, and then start a dot timer, right? Damage over time. So that's just some ideas that you could pass in there. Now, as it says here you can put any additional reaction to your logic, so any animation, effects, damage, etc. And that's basically what we're doing here, is we're doing our effects here. So I'm just matching that reaction. So if it's freeze, then I'm basically instantiating my ice block, adding it as a child, right? Get parent.add child, so it's a child of the actual enemy and not my status. I'm stopping the timer, resetting the duration, and starting it again. And the same thing with burn. I'm just creating an instance from that burn effect, pack scene up top, adding it into the scene, setting the emitting to true just in case it's not. Right, stopping the timer, resetting duration, and starting it up. And here's our timeout that we get to finally. So whenever this 0.1 times out, then we're gonna subtract from the duration. So duration, effect duration minus equals effect timer dot wait time, which again is at 0.1, right? And once our effect duration hits 0 or gets knocked below it, either way, right? We're doing less than or equal to just to get this, just to cover our bases, just in case we get some glitch where it goes into negative. We're going to set the active element to none. We're going to stop the timer. And it's as simple as that. Now, in my case, I'm also running a couple checks here. So I'm saying, hey, if you got an ice block effect that's on you, then we can go ahead and get rid of that. Now the timer is up. And same thing with the burning effect. If we have this visual burning effect going on, we can now free that up once the timer's done. And that's it. So to quickly jump over how this is working, we have our areas that can be applied to your projectile or have a particle effect. So if you want to have like a long fire stream, and all we're doing is we have an element type here assigned to it or as a variable that we can change. And if body, whatever body enters this area, if it has an element status node with it, then we're going to get that status, call apply element, pass in the elemental type and a duration. And when we call apply element, we're going to check if we have an active element. So we're going to say if there's currently no active element, then we're going to set the active element equal to the type that we passed in. We're going to set the duration and start the timer. Else, if we do already have an element activated on it, then we're going to create a new variable for the reaction, and we're going to call our function get reaction, pass in our elements. And what get reaction does, it checks if we have a combo of elements that'll give us a reaction, in my case either freeze or burn, and if not, then it returns that empty string. And based on that, we have two situations that can happen. If we do have a reaction, then I'm going to call the function trigger reaction and set the active element to none. And trigger reaction is simply going to emit a signal, and I'm applying my visual effect, either the ice block or the burning effect. And if we don't have a reaction, then we're going to change the active element to the new one. We're going to reset the duration and start up the timer again. And when that timer runs out, we're basically counting down our duration. And when it hits 0, we set the current element or the active element to none, stop the timer, and remove any effects. All right, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I know this is running on now, a little longer than what I thought it was going to be, but that's it. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you and you were able to understand and follow along with it. So with that, take care. Have yourselves a good one. I'll see you guys next time. And later.